And we're live.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. It's V the Guerrilla Economist coming to you live with my main man CJ, and we're here we're hanging with Harley. We are hanging with Harley on this Friday afternoon. Lots of things going on in the world: the virus, the geopolitical situation, oil, energy, the moves against China, the counter moves. I mean, my God, where do we begin? And you can find Harley, folks, over at the Schiller. Excuse me. Hello. I thought I
You're
lost you
good.
guys.
Sorry, I had an audio feed going. You're fine.
No worries. Okay. You can find out Harley over at the schillerinstitute.org, also at larouchepack.com. And with that being said, Harley, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, V. How are you?
Harley, I'm hanging in there. It's Friday. Some days, every other day, I think it's a Sunday. It's all smashed together. I've grown a beard. My hair is all scraggly, and I'm in bad shape, Harley. I'm in bad
This is
shape.
going to be the longest summer vacation ever, I think.
It truly is, man. I'm going nuts here.
Well, you're not the only one. The world is going nuts, and
it really is. Harley, in the wonderful liberal far left state of New York, we are on the verge of being drone struck. Like if I go out for a jog, I might get struck by a drone or something. We're on that. We're on the cusp of drone strikes over here.
You know, in Houston, something interesting happened. The county judge, who has a certain amount of power, said that if you don't wear a mask, you can be arrested and fined $1,000. And the police association put out a statement saying this is an overreaction. Look, stay safe, social distance, but we ain't arresting people who are out there without a mask. So, the basic point is that we're at a point where it's a transition. We're not 100% sure that what we're doing is the right thing. There's still a lot of questions to be answered about the nature of the disease. Can people be reinfected? Does the summer month clear it up? Summer months clear it up? There are a lot of questions we don't know. In the meantime, the president's trying to use the best scientific advice he can to keep an eye on things. You have people who are hurting badly, small businesses, hourly employees, people who work in restaurant, hospitality industries. There's a lot of pain going on, and there's no quick fix. But what I'm focused on, and what we're focused on at LaRouche, is that what people think of as a quick fix isn't going to work. If you think we can go back to where we were 2 months ago and just pick up as normal, you're making a mistake. And the mistake is that you're not paying attention to what's happening to the underlying economy.
Right.
Now, the so-called COVID virus recession or depression really was something that was already in process, underway, before the first person was diagnosed with coronavirus. And the question is, if we go back to where we were before, we're going to be in a realm of huge bailouts necessary just to keep the financial system going. And it's not keeping the financial system going on a sound basis, but on a completely fraudulent helicopter money, funny money for the speculators business. And it doesn't work. So we should use this as an opportunity to change the policy, to have a transition back to physical economy. And so we'll have a conference this weekend. It'll be streamed live on schillerinstitute.org. Your listeners are welcome to join in. It's starting at 10 o'clock Eastern tomorrow, Saturday. And we'll hopefully try to clarify some aspects of the strategic crisis, the financial crisis, the healthcare crisis, and also present some alternatives that people can actually do something with and do something about.
Absolutely. That's going to be important. It's oftentimes people miss the greater geopolitical landscape and how that affects all of this that's going on in the world. And oftentimes we simplify the great complexities involved nation to nation and country to country and how it affects all of us, Harley.
Well, I had a very interesting exchange with a contact of mine who just said to me, look, you keep talking about global issues, the big picture. I don't know whether I can keep my business open another week. I may lose my house in a month. How am I supposed to relate the two? And what I said to her is, a hard thing to say, but you have to say it. There's no solution in the short term. You've got to figure out what you can do, whether it's through borrowing, whether it's through maybe shutting down the business for a while. You've got to figure that out. But if we don't solve the bigger problem, whatever you do to survive today might not be there tomorrow or the next day. And so my focus is the bigger picture. And there are solutions. That's the thing that, it's so ironic that we've been told over and over and over, you can't create money out of nothing. Now, all of a sudden, we're seeing trillions of dollars being created out of hot air. The problem is they're creating trillions of dollars to go into a gigantic black hole of debt. And it's just going to be swallowed up and it's going to increase the indebtedness. That's the wrong way to do it. But if you do invest, if you create credit and invest it in physical production and putting people to work, Trump talked about a $2 trillion infrastructure policy. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
That's what the Chinese are doing. The Chinese just announced yesterday or 2 days ago, they're going to do a $14 billion project to set up a magnetically levitated train between Shanghai and Ningbo, which is about 400 kilometers, 275 miles. The train will be able to go up to 600 kilometers per hour.
Jeez.
So they're about to have work being done on a train, which will shorten the time. It will create jobs. It will develop new technologies. The magnetically levitated train technology is one we certainly could use in the United States, take some of the pressure off airports. But if Trump were to follow through with $2 trillion in infrastructure, it would have a political effect. Namely, it would call the bluff of the Democrats who keep saying they're for infrastructure, but they won't work with Trump. And it will call the bluff of the Republicans who say they want to produce, they want to go back to work, but they don't want the government to spend any money. But the private sector is not going to fund bridges and roads and tunnels and water projects because they can't make money at it. But some of these things are areas where the credit increases the overall wealth of the society. And that's why you have to do these kinds of things. So we can use this as a teaching moment to get people to understand the difference between funny money, as in central banking, the Federal Reserve System, and so on, versus an actual policy which says we're going to build the economy and do it in the most effective way, namely putting people to work, doing things which add real wealth. And you upgrade the productivity that way. You spend in research and development and science, and that's your future. So instead of thinking about how do we survive and go back to the old way of doing things, which was barely survival. I mean, you realize, I know you know this, how many people were living check to check, paycheck to paycheck,
Majority.
coming into this crisis.
Yeah, majority of people. I mean, we see the food lines, the videos of tens of thousands of automobiles lined up bumper to bumper in places like in Florida, all throughout the country, where they are literally waiting for food handouts because it's the working poor. It's those who are literally living on paycheck to paycheck that are suffering right now. It's terrible.
And these are people who don't have $400 in the bank to cover an emergency expense.
Correct.
And the only thing they have is credit cards, and their credit cards are maxed out. So
Correct.
The solution to this thing is not to put them back to work at low wages. It's to figure out how do we shift the bulk of production in this country toward higher wage jobs. And that's not a handout. The idea that the only way you can do it is the government sets up companies and runs the companies. No, that's not how we do it. I mean, in the 30s, they used the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to generate a huge volume of credit to put people to work building things that in many cases are still useful today, like the Tennessee Valley Authority. So we can do these things. But what's happened is our understanding of history, our understanding of economics, and our doom and gloom mentality has forced so many people to seek pleasure in Instagram and social networking that they're not able to see that there's a bigger world around them.
Correct.
And if you're more interested in getting a thumbs up from someone you've never met who you're communicating with on Facebook, than you are about a 600-kilometer-per-hour high-speed rail that doesn't have wheels that touch the ground, then there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, that's how it is. That's how it's become, and we're the most quote unquote socially connected people, but yet we're the most alone people. We're so devoid. I think we need to divorce ourselves from a lot of these tech platforms and these internet ghettos, for lack of a better word, Harley, internet ghettos, and we need to really start focusing on what's important.
They reinforce the way people think at present. And the way most people think at present are determined by social and economic paradigms, which develop into comfort zones, but may not define reality.
Correct.
So you're living in something which gives you comfort because it's an escape from reality, but it makes you incapable of dealing with the reality, which, like it or not, is real. It's there. You can't run away from it. So it's like trying to talk about the Middle East without talking about the Palestinian question, without talking about the Israeli Greater Zionist movement, without talking about ISIS and Al Qaeda. You know, the idea that somehow you can find a niche in an identity, whether it's religious, ethnic, tribal, family, sexual, you know, that's what people are reduced to, trying to find some measure of comfort in a society which seems too complex to deal with. Well, it's not too complex. And proof of it is that most people know that the economy is collapsing, and yet you hear how great the economy is. So you have to ask yourself, am I crazy or are they? And I think a lot of people are less crazy than they think, and the establishment is completely bonkers.
The establishment is absolutely, they have zero logic, and their response to everything is an overreach. And we're seeing it all over society, Harley. It's a complete overreach. It makes no sense. And Harley, I don't know if you noticed this, but did you read the USC studies? And right now, New York City just did a study, the antibody studies. They're in the hard data on this horrible virus that is airborne. That's the equivalent of airborne Ebola, and we got to socially distance, and we got to shut down the economy until June 2025. That data is in, and it found out that, well, in LA County, over 426,000 people had the antibodies for COVID, meaning at some point in their life they faced this coronavirus and they're over it. They were completely asymptomatic, which takes the death rate over there in LA County down to 0.026.
Yeah.
In New York, 3 million people tested positive for COVID, completely asymptomatic, which takes that death rate and brings it down to like 0.05. I mean, this is ridiculous. And I think the cat's coming out of the bag, and it's coming out. The narrative and the overreach is falling apart very quickly, Harley.
Well, and it's going to have really interesting consequences, because on the one hand, the Democrats were saying Trump didn't act quickly enough. He should have done more. He should have been tougher. And now they're going to find out that maybe he shouldn't have done some of these things that they were calling for. It's one of these ironies. And then, look, I was sitting around just laughing last night. I saw a campaign ad from Joe Biden. And what's the theme of the campaign ad? Trump capitulated to China. Trump is run by China. And what's the line that Biden has on this? That Trump listened to China as opposed to listening to his own intelligence community. Now, where have we heard that before? And I'll tell you where. 2 nights ago, Pelosi on MSNBC in an interview started in the middle of completely nothing else. She started blurting out, what does Putin have on Trump? What does Vladimir Putin have on Trump financially, socially, politically? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
This is the old Russiagate story. And she said, why does Trump trust Putin more than our own intelligence services? At the same time, saying, why does Trump trust China more than our own intelligence services? Maybe it's because our intelligence services have been busy for the last 3 years lying about Trump trying to destroy his administration. the fact that he doesn't trust them is a sign of sanity on his part, and insanity on the part of Biden and Pelosi. So I think you're right. We're going to have some real moments of reckoning coming up around the virus, and I'm still not sure what they're going to come up with and figure out. But I know one thing they better figure out: these bailouts, where suddenly you can provide trillions of dollars to speculators, but nothing to producers. That's upside down. And V, there's a very interesting development. I think you've talked with Marco Zanni before, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to have Marco back on.
Yeah. Well, we probably should. Marco is now the head of the sovereignty grouping in the European Parliament, all the parties that are part of the sovereignty group. And he challenged Lagarde, the former IMF director,
The
who's
giraffe-necked
the
woman.
European Central Bank, because what Lagarde is saying is that the European Central Bank can buy any form of financial paper, any form of junk bonds, corporate paper, collateralized loan obligations, except government bonds. And so Marco said to her, how are governments supposed to survive if you're the source of credit, but you won't buy government bonds, but you'll give billions to speculators? And Lagarde said, well, that's just the way we're constituted. And Marco Zanni said, exactly. Now you see why people don't like what you're doing. And she said, no, this is the only thing we can do. So the establishment is stuck in a mode that's dysfunctional and will never get us out of this crisis. In fact, it will make it worse and worse and worse. And just very quickly, on top of that, you have this anti-China push, which I did a study the last couple of days, and it's my new article, which will be out in the next day or so, which people can get if they write to me. What I show is that the huge anti-China operation is coming out of, guess where? London. And the Economist had a big special on April 16th, their cover story, China is winning. What should we do? Then the Henry Jackson Society, which is a neocon think tank that's a follow-up on PNAC, the Project for a New American Century, British unilateralism, had a conference saying the same thing. China's winning. What can we do to stop it? And so you have this line coming out that either the Chinese deliberately created the coronavirus and then sent infected people all over the world to get everyone in the world sick, or they just didn't tell anybody, neither of which is true. There's no evidence for either of those. So why are they pushing it? Well, because the current system is collapsing. And the Chinese have shown a better way of using credit to build up infrastructure and to pull people out of poverty, to create a middle class, and to develop even poor countries. What could we do if we did that here? Because that's what we used to do. So that's why there's this anti-China line, but it's very, very dangerous.
The whole thing, Harley, it's like I'm no fan of the CCP, but at the end of the day, it's like when you look at the Chinese model of what they've done for countries all over the world in developing infrastructure, the whole entire thing that they did with mutually beneficial trade agreements, that is a far cry. That is a far cry from what we've been doing for the last several decades, which is our British broken gunboat diplomacy model that we've taken from the Brits and the Brits have taken from the Romans, and it just simply doesn't work. And that's the thing at the end of the day. Now, do I believe that this thing was created in a lab? I think so. I think all the evidence is pointing towards that, but I don't think it's an intentional release because nobody wants to intentionally wreck their economy. Nobody wants to intentionally do that.
Well, and I agree with the president. Let's wait for the evidence. It'll come out at some point. But in the meantime, I think you're getting at something really quite important here, which is that our system is not working. It hasn't.
No, it needs to go.
It's been going downhill. Now, do you cling to a system because that's your tradition? If your tradition is wiping you out, if we're losing the middle class, which, the United States, the great experiment in the United States was we had no oligarchy, but we could create a healthy, thriving middle class. Well, that's endangered right now, endangered to the extreme levels. So something isn't working. And what does work is a model of economic investment and productivity. Now, I've been accused by some people recently of being a paid operative for the Chinese Communist Party. I
Mhm.
assure you, not only is that not true, but I've spoken out in the past repeatedly when I have seen examples of corruption in China, just as I do when I see it in the West.
Correct.
At this point, the Chinese, going back to 2008, did something that we didn't do. They jailed their corrupt bankers. They jailed the speculators. They didn't bail them out. They took over some of the banks that were looting the population and put the people doing that in prison. We gave them bonuses. We gave their banks an ability to have free cash to consolidate, take over foreclosed houses, and meanwhile put 8 or so million families out on the street. So one doesn't have to be a fan of the Communist Party of China to say they're doing a few things right while we're doing things wrong.
Yeah.
At this point, to threaten them the way people like Tom Cotton from Arkansas and Marco Rubio and others are doing is crazy. And a very beautiful thing happened in New York City 2 days ago. The Chinese consul in New York and the UN ambassador from China delivered a huge shipment of masks and gloves and gowns to the city health department. And when the representative of the mayor thanked them for it, they said, "Look, you don't have to thank us. We consider ourselves New Yorkers. We want to see this city come back." And there was mutual applause between the health department, and the officials from China. That's the cooperation that we need, not a blame game.
Yeah, no, blame game doesn't benefit anybody whatsoever. I think if there's anybody that needs to be blamed right now, it's these far leftist states and their disgusting overreach, and all these politicians and countries in the world in the West that are locking down their economies, hurting their populations the most. It's absolutely ridiculous. Now that the real data is out, and it's not what is projected by the World Health Organization or Bill Gates or Fauci or one of these deep state nut jobs. I mean, look at Sweden. I mean, they haven't locked down. They're fine. It's that's the overreach here. And then and here's the funny part: while locking down with this whole entire thing, playing the blame game, it's the most ridiculous thing.
Well, and playing the blame game and using it as the opportunity to bail out the real swindlers.
Correct. And Harley,
And
I agree with you.
knowing
The whole thing.
that people aren't going to go out on the street because of the lockdown.
Yeah.
They're not going to go out and protest the way they did in 2008.
If there's a lesson here that we need to learn from China that needs to be applied to this country, it's this: using credit, not for the gambling of Wall Street, using credit for building a physical production-based economy. That is the lesson to learn. And it's so simple that if we can do that, my God, we'd revolutionize this country, man.
Well, we used to do it. This is how we created a transcontinental railroad. This is how we unified the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. This is how we built up the interior of the nation. We built up the world's greatest agricultural sector in history.
Yes.
We had the most productive machine tool capability. Germany copied us, and then Germany developed an incredibly successful machine tool capability, which they're in the process of destroying now because of green environmentalism. So there are lessons, and we better learn them quickly and take advantage of this crisis, not to let the people in charge run things the way they want, but to take their hands off the levers of power and put that power back in the hands of the American people.
Absolutely. Very well said. Harley, thank you so much for being on with us and sharing these wonderful insights. Again, folks, this Saturday, and CJ, do you have the link up for the simulcast or?
Well, I put the link up for individuals to go to the Schiller and sign up for the to view it, but we'll be simulcasting it as well.
Fantastic.
And again, folks, if people want to get my latest article, just write to me at harleysch@gmail.com. I'll send it out, and I'll send you a link that you can sign up for free for my blog site. So it's HarleySch@gmail.com.
Absolutely. Harley, thank you so much for sharing this with us. And folks, thank you all for listening. Subscribe, like, comment, and share this wonderful, insightful time that Harley spends with us. Thank you all for listening in. And Harley, thank you again. Enjoy your weekends, folks. Take it away, CJ.